By abruptly tweeting U.S. troops withdrawal from Syria, the president unleashed a firestorm, and he's now eyeing reducing troops in Afghanistan by half. Many questioned the timing and his motivation. I heard from radio callers on SiriusXM who wondered if the move was more about knocking Mueller and Michael Cohen out of the headlines than it was a thought-out policy, especially where he caught his own military apparatus off guard. After all, this past July, John Bolton said that we would be there as long as the Iranians were still there. Well, they haven't left. But even if that cynicism about the president's timing is correct, was the president necessarily wrong? I hope he's right that we've defeated ISIS in Syria, although I have my doubts. But like the president, I'd like to see us out of Syria and Afghanistan too. 17 years removed from 9/11, it seems to me that the fundamental question is whether we make America, not the world, more or less safe every time we expand our international footprint. For far too long, our rote response has been to open a base every time there's a hotspot discovered somewhere in the world. That not only puts a target on the back of all the men and women we deploy, but it plays into the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS recruitment as they argue that we are interventionalists intent on a presence on what they regard as the Arabian Peninsula. One other thought, although you'll never hear him say so, President Trump surely knows that he's now recognizing what President Obama figured out. As David Sanger pointed out in the New York Times this week, Trump's view that American forces cannot alter the strategic balance in the Middle East and should not be there was fundamentally shared by his immediate predecessor, Barack Obama. It was Mr. Obama who, at almost the exact same moment in his presidency, announced the removal of America's last troops in Iraq, fulfilling a campaign promise. Well, my hunch is that we can add the name of my next guest to those of Trump and Obama, at least in this regard. Joining me now to discuss is former presidential candidate and Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman, let's agree, because I think you and I have a tendency to see this issue the same way. Let's agree that the president's execution was ham-handed, right?
Yeah, it could have been much better, and I think he has a tendency to go in a direction diplomatically. He does a poor job, even though when he's doing the right thing. No, it should have been done, and I think he has a firm ground. I mean, it's not like, I don't see it as a political event as much as he had good defense. He campaigned on it. He said it was a bad war. He wanted to get out. The timing, you might argue there's a little bit there, but I think it had more to do with his discussion with Erdogan than, domestic politics here at home. But no, I think he's doing great. I think it's fantastic that he's doing it. I find what is fascinating is the bringing it together of the various groups, because in a way it used to be that progressives were more the anti-war people rather than the Republicans, but now there are some Republicans looking for the progressives, and some of them are demanding that they stay. There's a few, though, that what I really like about what's going on in the discussion, there's a few well-known progressive liberal Democrats that can't stand Trump. But you know what they said? He's doing the right thing. I like people to stand out on principle in spite of their personal biases, and I think that this is good. I think that this, and I'm so happy that he's going to maybe move it on to Afghanistan. But you
so
know,
let me play devil's advocate with you. You referenced the call from Erdogan, and you know the argument that gets made is one of, we have now left the Kurds vulnerable. Respond to that.
Well, first thing is, I don't think that's true. But if it's true, it's an internal problem for Turkey. And there's been hints that, there's been discussions before. No, I think they have to determine what it is. But that's not our responsibility. I mean, if you're running an empire, it's our responsibility. This is the whole point. Should we start our debate and our plans from the assumption that we have the moral obligation to run an empire, that we are the great nation, we spread American exceptionalism, and therefore we have this moral obligation? Or should we believe in a republic and we have no business there, which is designed by the Constitution, and the whole thing would be different. But unless we attack the subject of should we have an empire, unfortunately, the concept of the empire is well entrenched, bipartisan, and has a lot to do with oil. It has a lot to do with the military-industrial complex and the space special interests. But the empire is very convenient. And then there's people who don't have any monetary benefit, and it's this patriotism, super patriotism. We are powerful. We have this obligation, and we have to stay there. And they like every war because we're expressing ourselves, because you can't have a weak boss. And that is the attitude that I think has to be challenged.
Here's another criticism. A critic would say, well, wait a minute, Congressman, we thank God have not had a serious attack on our shores since September 11, and that's because we've been so activist overseas. Respond to that.
Well, I think it's probably in spite of it. I think we've done some things. If the airlines had been totally in charge of their own security, we'd have never had 9/11. And of course, if we had never been in the Middle East, we wouldn't have had a 9/11. Bin Laden was very clear. He says, the reason we attack is because you've been bombing incessantly and destroying many, many lives, thousands of children being killed in Iraq. I don't like the idea that the United States government has their military on the Holy Land of the Arabian Peninsula. And he was convinced the American people and the American government never treated the Palestinians fairly. So that was all previous. So it's our intervention that creates the problem. And that's what they're using. We have to stay and they'll concede. They're even starting to concede.
I get it. No, I get it. Listen, it took me years to realize that it's not because we like lap dances and lattes and jeans from the Gap that they hate us. I mean, initially I bought into that narrative. One last thing. So it was a third criticism, because I again tend to see it the way you do, so I want to raise these arguments. A critic would say, we only had 2,000 advisors in Syria, and if for no other reason than to gather intel and show allegiance with our allies, we should have left them in place. What's the quick response to that?
There's no practical benefit from that. That means you're planning to do something. My big concern right now is that we will stay too much involved. We need to just have a clean cut and just come home. But, you know, will that bring the CIA out? Will it bring our special forces out? Will there be sanctions? Will we have foreign aid with conditions? So, no, we're very much interventionists. This is a teeny, teeny step away from the militant empire that we operate. And it's so impractical, but it's a step in the right direction.
Congressman, thanks for coming back, and have a great Christmas.
Thank you. Same to you.